Once we conducted our pay survey, we've got an awful lot of data to play with. And we need to think about, well, what can this tell us and what can it not tell us? And how do we use it in the most effective way? So one of the things that we need to do is to check the quality of the data. Is this telling us something meaningful? Or is there something wrong with the way that we've collected it that we need to be cautious about? So one of the things that we can do is to have a look at the frequency distributions within the data. Is the data skewed in one way or another? Are we getting a high degree of outliers within the sample, so that we're not getting the kind of normal spread or the normal distribution of data points that we might expect, given that given a population of a certain size. So looking at the frequency distributions can allow us to just do a little health check on the data to identify whether there's anything wrong with it, whether there's anything we need to be cautious about, that maybe it's skewed in one way or another because of outliers at either the top or the low or the bottom end. Once we've established that our data is broadly okay, then we need to start thinking what it's telling us. So we may start to think about trying to think about the measures of central tendency that would give us an idea about where the middle of that market might be, what the market rate might be. And of course there are three broad measures of central tendency. There's mode, which in this case would be the most popular rate of pay for that particular sample job. It might be the mean, the average rate across all of the jobs that we've included in the sample, or the median, which would be the midpoint, the point at the 50th centile in the survey. Now, mode is typically not used that often in these kinds of studies, but we might use mean or median, and they might have various strengths. The mean, the average rate, because it evens out a lot of the variation within the sample data, it averages it, is often thought to be a good indicator of where the middle of the market might be, where the market is as a whole, what the market rate might be. The reason to be cautious with the mean is that it may be sensitive if the market is relatively skewed. So if there are, say, a lot of outliers at the top end of the market, if that market's kind of distributed unevenly in a way which isn't normally distributed, then the mean may be less reliable because it gets pulled one way or another, whereas the bulk of the market may be in a slightly different place. So one of the things that we might think about is something called the Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient is a measure of inequality within systems. Now, if the Gini coefficient is demonstrating a very high level of inequality, that the market is skewed, say, towards the top end, then the mean will be showing a relatively high level, but that's simply because of relatively few people with very high levels of pay in a certain area are pulling the market, distorting the distribution of the data in that particular direction. So if we feel that the mean isn't showing us a really helpful market rate, then we might think about the median instead. That shows us where the middle of the market rate. But the central measures of central tendency, they give us different ideas about where the middle of the market is, what the market rate might be, and it's typically considered to be somewhere within these measures. Now, around the measure of central tendency, wherever the measure of market rate is, then there are also issues about distribution. Now, in statistical distribution, we'd often think about use of standard deviation. In pay surveys, we usually think about it in terms of centiles or quartiles, which divide up the market between the bottom end, anything up to the 25th centile, the top end, anything above the 75th centile. And these give us an idea about maybe how to divide up what what a lead rate would look like, or a lag rate, what that would look like for any particular job. We can also use these distribution points, these quartiles or centile points, to help us at a later point to start to think about maximum and minima for pay ranges. So we can remember that for future use, that those distribution points can also be used to set the limits of pay ranges in the pay structure design later on. The other thing to think about in terms of market data is that by its very nature, as soon as we've collected it, it begins to be out of date. And that when we're using an off-the-shelf pay survey, we may be looking at data which is quite old in some cases, and that the market continues to move. So the data that we're looking at is out of date, just by the nature of how it's collected and when we're looking at it, and particularly when we're going to make use of it. So presumably we're looking at pay survey data in order to put something in place at some point in the future. So we need to allow for a period of time by which we can adjust the market data that we've got in front of us to apply trend changes to that data to uplift that survey data so that it's still relevant when we actually make use of it. So we can use, whether it's government statistics or various sources of labour market statistics to show what the trend changes have been over a period of time. And we can apply that kind of information to act as a multiplier to the pay survey data to make sure that it's current and up to date. Now, sometimes labour markets are moving quite quickly, and that the increases of pay in labour markets are quite dramatic, and so that'll make quite a big difference. At other times, particularly when labour markets are quite slack, nothing much changes at all, and so the changes might be very minimal. But one way or other, we need to make sure that our data is right and is as relevant as it possibly can be, so that we're comparing and making use of data that is relevant at the point in time where we need to make it. Now, once we've established that our data is broadly okay and that we can rely on it to a certain extent, then we need to think about how we use that data to construct a market pay line. That we have these data points which, for our sample of jobs in our organisation, from our job structure, we've gone and we've priced them against the marketplace. And when we plot those on a graph, we will probably find, in all likelihood, that those data points don't line up in a straight line, that they zig and zag across the axis, that for some jobs they will be a little bit lower than the next job and so on. It doesn't line up. We don't have a clear, a straight relationship between the increase in job evaluation points for our job structure and the rates of pay that equate to those jobs from our pay survey. So, well, we're either faced with a situation where we have a crooked market pay line, which isn't terribly useful, because the point of this is to make use of it for all of those other jobs that were not in the pay survey. So we need to have some confidence in establishing a market reference point that has a clear relationship between our job evaluation scores and the pay rates that are ongoing in the outside world. So we need to remove those zigzags from our market line. And in order to do that, we run a regression test. We reduce the differences between all of those data points. Now, obviously in doing that, we're engaging in a kind of statistical transformation. We're playing around with the data. We're no longer got the raw market rates anymore. We're changing things. And so we have to know whether or not those changes that we're applying are reasonable, that they still provide us with a reasonable relationship between our internal job data and the market pay rates. So when we undertake our regression, the regression will spit out an R-squared score, and it will tell us what the strength of the relationship was between the pay data and the job valuation points. Now, we know that there's a cutoff point for an R-squared score, that if it falls below 0.7, then the relationship between the two aspects of the data is becoming too thinly stretched. The zigzags would be too great to reduce to a single line and then still to rely on it. So we're looking to see whether that R-squared score holds true. If it doesn't, if the R-squared score is too low, then we need to go back and to rethink what we've done with our pay survey. We need to think initially, have we matched the right jobs in our organisation to the jobs within the pay survey? Have we matched them appropriately? Are the jobs in our organisation similar enough to the jobs in the pay survey to be acceptable? If we have done that, then we have to think back further and consider whether the approach that we've taken towards our job evaluation is effective, that maybe the relationship between the jobs in terms of the points that we've awarded to them in job evaluation is the problem, and that's causing the difficulty when we go and apply it to market. But that R-squared score is a very useful indicator of the health of the decisions that we've taken up until this point, both in terms of our internal job structure and in terms of the decisions that we've made in the design of the pay survey. So that's a very useful process to go through. If we're happy with the R-squared score, and the point isn't to get the perfect one, but to satisfy us that there's a reasonable relationship between the job evaluation scores that we've conducted and the pay survey data that we've collected in relation to the sample of jobs within the organisation, then we can rely on that line and we can think about that as a reasonable expression of the marketplace as it applies to those sample jobs, and beyond that to apply to the broader jobs within the organisation. And when we've gone to that point, then we can start to think about whether or not we simply take and use that market line as an expression, or whether we want to alter our market orientation by raising the line generally and adopting a lead pay policy, or whether we want to go below the market line, operate a lag pay policy. We reduce the market rate for all of the jobs in the organisation, a general lag policy. We're putting these abstract ideas into practice, that for every job valuation point you move up the scale, then that results in a lower amount of pay, or if we go the other way, a higher amount of pay. Or maybe we think about operating multiple pay policy positions, so that at a certain point we use a certain pay policy, and at another point we use a different pay policy. We can play around with this, with different orientations towards the marketplace at different points within the job structure. But whatever approach we take, we've now gone from having a market line to making a choice. We've established a pay policy. And so that line on the graph now becomes our pay policy line for our reward system to use in future aspects of reward design.